What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the 415ers podcast. As always, on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Please download that Odyssey app, rate, subscribe to us. That's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. We're going to be getting into the second week of OTAs heavily today. Of course, a big name and a big quote coming out of that. Also, some quarterback talk and something about a kicker, Mark, I think might be coming out of camp as well. But before we dig into all of it, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. We're recording this Thursday evening just after game one of the NBA Finals has gone final. The Nuggets come out on top in game number one. We were watching that one at the place. Fun game. It's good that the NBA Finals are here. And I know there's a lot of summer left to go. But once you get to this part of the year, Evan, I know it's only the beginning of June. But once you get to this part of the year, you can just feel football being close. I think when Sunday comes around, this weekend, will be 10 weekends away, 10 weeks away from the start of the preseason of the NFL season, which is kind of crazy. It'll be here before you know it. So I'm looking forward to that. Obviously looking forward and hoping for a fun NBA Finals series. But I'm doing well, Evan. How are you doing?
I'm good, especially considering the fact that I feel like the NBA Finals is already over. So I'm already looking towards the next season, which, of course, is football season.
Not so fast.
Not so fast. Game one, can we just skip to game three and then skip to the trophy presentation? Denver Nuggets got this thing wrapped up.
Okay.
But no, I'm with you that it does feel like, the seasons are beginning to turn a little bit. And I don't know also if it just doesn't has to do with the fact that the NBA playoffs have not been the most marquee, especially for a lot of Bay Area sports fans around here. And baseball is still, it's not in its infancy by any means, but it's still, I guess, not at the point where a lot of people, I think, tend to turn their attention towards baseball around this time, maybe around July. But obviously there's a lot going on with the 49ers right now. And, we've been taking a look at Trey Lance, been taking a look at Sam Darnold. We'll dig into those guys in just a little bit. But kind of the biggest quote coming out of camp as we're recording this on Thursday, was from Brandon Aiyuk, who made big headlines this offseason, tweeting about how he was, a 1,000-yard receiver as the fourth option in a top-tier offense, and was extended this last offseason. And so, his future is not necessarily a question mark, but there are options as to what Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers will do at the end of this season, of course, depending on how it plays out. But he feels very confident that the way it will play out is him, quote, taking off, or he feels like he's about to take off. And Mark, for a guy that had a 1,000-yard year last year, 8 touchdowns, and was the number one receiver on a pretty dominant offense, those are some big quotes, big words.
Yeah, they are big words. You had a 1,000-yard season and you're going to take off from that. What does that mean exactly? Obviously, he's extremely confident in his abilities, and he's always been that guy. He hasn't been shy to say things like this in the past. So it's not necessarily surprising to me that he said something like this. However, I think it does mean something in this instance. And I think you also you look at him. Now, I haven't been down there in person just yet. Unfortunately, a lot of the media sessions have been during the day. And you and I both working at 95.7 The Game during the days. We can't get down there during those times. But just seeing him at the podium, Evan, I don't know about you, but he seems to me like he's put on a bit of weight as well. It seems like he's a little bit bigger and stronger. I know he came in at 6 foot 200 last year. I wouldn't be shocked if maybe he's up around 205, 207, somewhere around there now. He does seem to be a little bit bigger. And the 49ers, of course, love Aiyuk because he's a guy who can work the ball down the field a bit more than some of their other receivers. Deebo Samuel is not that deep threat. But even without Brandon Aiyuk saying this, Evan, I think you can kind of see another, I'm not sure takeoff or career season is exactly how I would put it, but I think you can just see another progressive season in the cards for Brandon Aiyuk. And you mentioned the wide receiver room and Deebo Samuel. Brandon Aiyuk's big offseason is next offseason. So he desperately wants to have a really good season, assuming he wants to stay with the San Francisco 49ers. He could really use a really big season. So I think the hints have already been placed before us, even without Brandon Aiyuk coming out and saying something like, I'm about to take off this season. I think even without that, you could kind of read the writing on the walls that this might be another season where he continues to improve. I mean, you look at his first 3 years, he's had more yards every single year, not always more receptions. From his rookie to sophomore season, he actually went down in terms of the number of receptions, but he has consistently progressed throughout his career, and I think that's going to continue here into his fourth season.
Sorry about that. No, I'm 100% with you. The only thing that makes me, I guess, sort of question the quote about Ayuk is I'm just not sure if he'll get the opportunity statistically to kind of take off more so than he did last year because he was pretty healthy. And I understand he's bigger. I'm sure he's faster. He's been working on his game. And I don't doubt that he'll be a better player, but in Kyle Shanahan's offense, there's so many mouths to feed, and you get an added about 6 or 7 weeks of Christian McCaffrey, which you didn't have last year already. So, and Debo Samuel's coming up in a pretty big season. I'm sure he's going to want the football. George Kittle has a potential opt out at the end of this season. I'm sure he's going to want to try and improve on what he already built on last year with Brock Purdy, which was 6 touchdowns in the last, 7 games of the regular season. So I think that Brandon Aiyuk does feel like he's about to take off, and I feel like he'll be a better player overall this year than last year. I just wonder if he'll have the opportunity to put up those gaudy numbers that I'm sure he has himself already locked in for.
He did have, for what it's worth, I do agree with you. Maybe it's not necessarily a progression in terms of just the pure statistics, but perhaps it's more of general impact. If he is the go-to guy on third downs, if he's coming up with, you know, more targets in the red zone and he's turning those into touchdowns, maybe it's something more along those lines. But what you said there got me thinking. Okay, how did his numbers perhaps change when he was in the offense last year when Christian McCaffrey was added? McCaffrey's first game with the 49ers was that loss to Kansas City. Now, that he didn't really play like a normal amount of snaps in that game. So his first start was the following week against the Los Angeles Rams on the road. Aiyuk kind of kept it pretty consistent. He had 7 catches against the Chiefs, 6, 6, 2, but 5, 5. He had a 9-catch game against the Raiders a few weeks later. So looking at just the sample from last year, Evan, I don't know necessarily if that's going to be a huge factor. But I do agree with you. If there were maybe one factor that I would need to keep an eye on in terms of, like, if I was betting a Brandon Aiyuk over under, I think the reason why I would be fearful for choosing the overside is just because of the nature of the 49ers offense. You have mouths to feed, and generally they tend to be a team that runs the ball more. And when they're playing with a lead, which you would expect them to for a lot of this season, they tend to get a little bit conservative. And that doesn't always mean great things for wide receivers hitting certain receiving benchmarks. So while I do agree with you, I still think we could see another progression, another step from Brandon Aiyuk, even if it's not necessarily statistical.
Well, but I also think statistically could be helped by having some more continuity at quarterback, which of course didn't happen last year. And I think that to me was another reason why the 1,000-yard year, if you want to say it's not as valuable because there's 17 games, I guess I'll hear you. But I did feel like the 1,000-yard season was impressive because of how many different arms were delivering the football to him. And that's the mark of a good receiver, of a great receiver, is being able to dominate in the aerial game, no matter who's throwing you the football. And guys in his class like CeeDee Lamb, like Justin Jefferson, those guys could go and get open in a phone booth no matter who was throwing it to them. So if you're Brandon Aiyuk, I do think there's going to be some steps in that area. And we saw a little bit of it in OTAs today. It was reported that Brandon Aiyuk caught multiple 40-yard passes from both Trey Lance as well as Sam Darnold. And the catch from Trey Lance evidently was not one that was necessarily on target. It was more of a go get me kind of ball. And so that's where I believe Ayuk can take the next step, is in being more of a bailout receiver as opposed to a system guy, which of course he kind of needed to be and was, I think, in the doghouse a little bit, not this year, but in the past year, the year before under Kyle Shanahan, is because he needed to grasp the system first before being able to implement his own style on this 49ers offense. And I think that's where we'll see the next step. And that's where he's talking about taking off, is that he's already comfortable. He knows the playbook. He knows ideally who's going to be delivering the football to him, and he feels comfortable with them. And now it's about him, Ayuk, putting his own flair on on the 49ers offense.
I think something about Ayuk that goes a little bit maybe underappreciated, maybe unnoticed as well, is the fact that he's been able to be consistently effective regardless of who's throwing him the football. Do you remember a year ago, if we can just forget everything we know about Brock Purdy and just think about what it was like 12 months ago, 365 days ago? The talk of the offseason was Brandon Aiyuk and Trey Lance working out together. Do you remember that? They would work out together consistently down in Los Angeles, and everyone was, oh my God, like this connection is going to be fantastic. We're a little worried about the Deebo Samuel and Trey Lance connection because, of course, last year Deebo Samuel was in the middle of the contract negotiation where he asked for a trade, and the 49ers ultimately ended up getting him the deal that he wanted. And there was some questioning about that connection. But one thing that most people felt pretty confident and certain about was Trey Lance and Brandon Aiyuk. And then Brandon Aiyuk, goes out there and with the first game under Trey Lance, obviously it's a monsoon game in Chicago, whatever. The results don't really matter that much. He has to then adjust back to Jimmy Garoppolo, does a pretty good job at that. And then Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt a little past halfway through the season, and he has to adjust to this rookie, and he really doesn't miss much of a beat. So I think Brandon Aiyuk deserves a little bit of credit for being able to gel with anyone who's throwing him the football. He's shown that really his entire career. Of course, he's had some up and downs. You mentioned, the Shanahan doghouse that it seemed like he was in at certain times in his career. But one thing that has been consistent is he's been able to work and get comfortable with almost anyone who's been throwing him the football. And you're right, with another season coming up where presumably Brock Purdy is throwing him the football, you would imagine that connection just to get even stronger. So that could be, as you said, another reason why he is, quote, about to take off. But I think that's an area of Brandon Aiyuk's game that maybe doesn't get the attention it deserves, because it's not easy adjusting from one quarterback to another. Everyone is so different. They deliver balls different ways. You have to, adjust the way you run your routes and how you get open depending on who's throwing you the ball. I think Aiyuk does a really good job of that.
Yeah, and the overlooked aspect of his game is something that he mentioned quite a bit at the podium, the fact that he's felt like he's always been overlooked a little bit. And even as a first round pick, he was in a wide receiver heavy class. So even though he went 25th in the first round, he was still behind a bunch of guys that I'm sure he takes as a bit of a slight. Arizona State by no means is a powerhouse. I'm sure there's a lot of other places that he would have loved to go. And of course, now he's the fourth option in a run first offense, according to him. So I think he does have a lot to prove. In my mind, this year is about him basically stepping into the spotlight. It's not as if he hasn't been productive. It's not as if he hasn't been a good player, but he has absolutely been overshadowed by all of those bigger names on offense, the Samuels, the Kittles, the McCaffreys. Those names are the ones that come first. If you're looking at like the Sunday Night Football lineup, who's on the marquee, it's always been, well, it was Jimmy Garoppolo, but it's going to be George Kittle, or it's going to be Deebo, or it's going to be McCaffrey. Aiyuk is fourth, I think, on that sort of pecking order. And so he's got to prove that he should be higher, or wants to.
Yeah, no, he does. And I think, again, we've talked about this so much this offseason. The next offseason is going to be kind of a checkpoint for Brandon Aiyuk and the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think pressure is the right word to describe it. I think Brandon Aiyuk would more likely look at it as an opportunity but there's no denying how important this season is for him. And of course, it's important for the 49ers. We've spent so much time this offseason talking about that and their window. But I think even specifically for Brandon Aiyuk, even beyond team success, and I'm not saying that he is even considering it's anywhere in his mind where he would be putting personal success over team success. I'm not saying that at all. But there's just, I think, an extra level of importance for this season for Brandon Aiyuk. It's more important for him, perhaps you could argue, than Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel has already got his gigantic contract after his rookie deal. George Kittle has that deal already. Christian McCaffrey, of course, we spent a lot of time talking about how little the 49ers were paying him this most recent year. He's already signed a pretty big deal after his rookie deal as well. He is, Brandon Aiyuk, that is the one main key contributor on the offense who doesn't have that big deal yet. So I think that adds to the importance of this year and Brandon Ayuk's, I don't know, willingness or his just extra added motivation to, as he said, take off this year.